just have to acknowledge.
No, I've got it here. Tell me.
Good, thank you.
Another round of applause for the Fuzeka High School Choir. A very good evening to you and welcome to the 5th annual Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture. My name is Ridi Tlabi and I'll be your MC this evening. Now, I'm very tempted to call the Archbishop Emeritus the birthday boy, but I'm quite nervous because 2 years ago, we were doing a roundtable discussion for Al Jazeera television, and the producer of that program told me that in order for the audience to identify with the show and feel at home, I must address all the participants by their first names. So I looked around me and I saw the former president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, and I thought, hello, Jimmy won't work. I saw the former Secretary General of the United Nations. How do I say, how's it, Kofi? And then I looked at the Archbishop Emeritus, Desmond Tutu, and I said to the producer, now you go and tell him that you want me, then 35 years old, to call him by his first name. You go. And he marches on confidently to our birthday boy and makes the suggestion. Before he even finished the sentence, the arch went, no, 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 never. So that didn't go down well. So this is the only time I'll call you a boy because it's your birthday boy. We welcome Mrs. Leah Tutu, without whom we know you'd be half the man you are, if not a quarter. She's been your pillar, she's been your strength, and we also want to give her a gift of gratitude for sharing you so generously with this nation and with the world. Welcome, Mama. And we also welcome in our midst His Grace, the Most Reverend Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. You continue to preach the message of leadership with a purpose. And whether we are inside the church, inside your sermons, it doesn't matter because you continue to reach us and touch us with your message, and we are grateful. Thank you. Reverend Mpho Tutu, You know, I've seen you on television being asked all sorts of things, and there's always the question, how does it feel to be the daughter of the Reverend? And you go, I don't know. And we feel your mark as well, and we thank you for also opening the door and letting us take part into your family. Thank you. Professor Brian Pretorius is the Vice Chancellor of this university. What did I miss? I think I'm thinking about my husband. His name is Brian. Look, forgive me, it's night time. Professor Tyrone Pretorius, thank you very much. I'm sure you're relieved that there isn't a Rhodes statue anywhere near here, and we can proceed in peace. But Professor, it must be so gratifying for you to be back at your alma mater. And I know that you are very passionate about education, you are very passionate about human development, and I'm sure that this university is feeling your presence. Welcome. I want to welcome our guest speaker. This is the individual who will be giving the 5th lecture. I don't want to say her name yet, but I'm giving you a hint. She's a CIA spy. She's not a good spy if you know who she is. All right, before we proceed this evening, let us call again the Fuzega High Choir to lead us in singing. Fezega. Thank you. Geez, you know, I'm wondering what happens at those political party conferences when people are going like this. If I'm already feeling the heat, but thank you very much. We are partners in this, I appreciate it. Please lead us in singing the national anthem, the entire national anthem. Thank you. much. Thank you. Let's be seated. Now, this occasion cannot have the Archbishop. Sorry, the mayor. Okay. You see, we laugh when politicians say all protocol observed, but there's a reason for that. Mayor Patricia de Lille, welcome. I'd like us to talk about the e-tolls later. You know, I live in Joburg and... So any occasion cannot have the Archbishop Emeritus' name without beginning with a prayer. It's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Malcolm Matitiani. He has an honors degree in linguistics from the University of South Africa and a master's degree in rabbinic literature from the University of Cape Town, University of Potsdam. He received his ordination from the Abraham Geiger College in Berlin, Germany, in September 2006. The first of 3 to be ordained in Germany since the Holocaust, and I think that is so poignant and significant. Rabbi Matatiane is one of the rabbis of the Cape Town Progressive Jewish Congregation, and I think his greatest achievement, because Rabbi, when I was sent your profile, this was written in capital letters, so I assume it is your greatest achievement, that you are married to Gillian.
So, seeing this is the peace lecture, the International Peace Lecture, I thought I'd open up with a prayer for peace. The Hebrew word for peace is shalom, which the root of shalom means wholeness, completeness. Indeed, when we greet somebody in modern Hebrew, we say, Ma shlomcha or Ma shlomech. Literally means, what is your peace? Are you at peace? Because peace is not simply the absence of conflict and strife and war. Peace is a feeling of wholeness, of completeness. Peace starts from within, and then you work for peace without. The following prayer is an adaptation from a prayer which is said during the daily liturgy, daily prayers amongst us Jews. Sim shalom tova v'racha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, aleinu v'al kol ha'olam, v'achenu avinu kulanu ke'echad bo'o panecha, כי ואופניך נתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו תורת חיים ואהבת חסד וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום וטוב בעיניך לברך את העולם בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך ברוך אתה אדוני המברך העולם בשלום. Grant peace, goodness and blessing, grace, kindness and mercy to us and to all the world. Bless us, our Creator, all of us together, through the light of your presence. Truly, through the light of your presence, eternal our God, you gave us a teaching of life, love of kindness, justice and blessing, mercy, life and peace. May you see fit to bless the world at all times, at every hour, with your peace. Praise are you, Eternal One, who blesses the world with peace. Shalom.
Thank you so very much, Rabbi. Now we are all guests of the Vice-Chancellor of this wonderful institution, Professor Tyrone Pretorius. And Professor, I would like to invite you to come to the podium to invite us all and share with us your vision.
Chancellor of the University, Archbishop Makgoba, the former Chancellor of the University, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Ms. Leah Tutu, Reverend Paul Tutu and the Tutu family, Mayor Patricia de Lille, our former Vice-Chancellor, Professor Brian O'Connell, and Ms. Judith O'Connell, Vice-Chancellor of our neighboring institution, Dr. Prince Nevutalu, esteemed ambassadors and other members of the diplomatic corps, Mr. Don McRobert of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, Chair of the Board of Trustees, Mr. Fred Robertson, and Trustee Judge Essa Musa, our guest of honor, Advocate Thuli Madonsela, members of council in attendance, fellow executive members, deans, and colleagues from the academic, professional, and support services, Mr. Vuyani Sokoba, President of the SRC, and members of the SRC, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, MC Ridi Tladi, I think that about covers everyone. It is indeed a great honor and a privilege for me to welcome you to the University of the Western Cape, and in particular to the 5th Annual Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture. I know we're competing with the rugby tonight, but seeing this hall filled to overflowing demonstrates where our priorities lie. I must ask you, since I'm recording it, I must ask those of you that tweet and receive messages to please keep it to yourself, because even these days we are still not able to predict what the outcome of a Springbok rugby match is going to be. Dear Arch, I'm sorry, I think I must be more specific since we have 2 archbishops. Dear Archbishop Tutu, we are all so delighted to have you back on campus, to have you among us, especially after your recent health setback. I must tell you that your message to my office, commenting on the good care you received, which led you to conclude that the nurses looking after you must be UWC trained. That message raised our spirits because in the first instance it indicated that you still treasure your link to UWC, and in the second instance we knew that your good humor, your wonderful humor persists. May I publicly and on behalf of the university congratulate you on your birthday. May you have many, many more. As we host the 2015 Peace Lecture, I think it is opportune to remind ourselves that we are also celebrating the 17th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. In the founding charter of the United Nations, nations committed themselves to practice tolerance, to live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, to unite their strength to maintain international peace and security. 70 years on, it would seem that peace around the world is under threat. It would appear that the resolve of conflicts by peaceful means is increasingly being replaced by aggression and by force. The conflicts in many parts of the world, the effects that we see daily, the posturing and the saber rattling by powerful nations serves as a daily reminder of how elusive peace is. Yet, we may not despair. And the United Nations adoption of the 2030 Sustainable Developmental Goals with a new focus on peace is part of what gives us hope. One of these goals is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. This goal, with its focus on peace, reminds us of the intersection between sustainable development and peace. It tells us that peace cannot exist without sustainable development. Equality before the law is also a condition for peace. People respect the rule of law if access to justice is not determined by social status or by the color of their skin. They develop confidence in the rule of law, not only when justice is done, but when justice is seen to be done. The question is, where are we in relation to maintaining peace and stability in South Africa? It would seem that the sterling work of our Archbishop Tutu and many others towards a national reconciliation is being undermined by our slow progress to build an inclusive economy for all. There's a scramble for scarce economic opportunities, and this has in turn given rise to social ills that account for the instability in our communities. The truth is, and the truth remains, that maintaining peace and stability in South Africa will depend to a large extent on our ability to develop an inclusive economy fast. Such an inclusive economy would, however, be fruitless if we do not reverse the moral decay and develop ethical leadership. It is concerning to all of us that humility and morality that both our Archbishop epitomizes no longer define the character of role models today. Unethical behavior is becoming pervasive in our society, and not least in the public service. Our biggest challenge is that there is a lack of leadership with a moral gravitas to lead by example. The great Chinese philosopher Confucius contends, only when those who govern remain clean, upright, and unseduced by greed can common people refrain from stealing. It is thus important for those of us that are at the helm to have the moral standing and the credibility if we are to win the fight against corruption. Tonight we welcome such a person to deliver the Desmond Tutu Peace Lecture. Through her sterling work as the public protector, Advocate Madonsela has strengthened public confidence in the capacity of the Office of the Public Protector to give recourse to and to protect the vulnerable and the destitute. Archbishops, I beg your indulgence as I quote from the scriptures. In the book of Mark, it says, a prophet is not without honor except in his or her own town and in his or her own home. Whilst there are some who might wish to withhold that honor in our country, we, on the contrary, are honored by Advocate Madonsela, and we honor her exemplary leadership that she's giving to this country. Advocate Thuli Madonsela, it is an honor to welcome you on behalf of the University of the Western Cape and the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. Peace.
Thank you so much, Professor Pretorius, and for especially reminding us that we all have a responsibility. You used the words role models, and sometimes we don't consciously model to other people, but the way we conduct ourselves, the decision we make, and the foundations on which those decisions are made can be role modeling to someone else without us being aware of it. Thank you for reminding us that we all carry that responsibility. It is a pleasure to welcome a formidable person who is the strength behind the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. She keeps the work of this foundation together with other partners going. And I am especially proud when I listen to Reverend Tutu speaking. And I think our last conversation we had at the Stellenbosch Literary Festival was about forgiveness. And what stood out for me was that it is expected for a reverend to preach forgiveness. We expect that of you. But the truest test was you taking us on your own personal journey of how you arrived at forgiveness. And that was inspiring and gave us strength. And we know that the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation is in great hands, in your hands. Please come and talk to us.
Good evening. Okay, I can see you. I know you're there. Good evening. I'm so delighted that Reddy and Professor Pretorius got to speak before, so I can say, all protocols observed. And I am so pleased to be here at this wonderful annual event that is rapidly becoming the flagship engagement not only of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, but a very special time on the Cape Town intellectual calendar. The Legacy Foundation was established in 2011 to protect, nurture, and proliferate the work that my parents have done on earth and guide that which we hope will be done in their names in the future when they are, we hope, and they certainly hope, in heaven. We're going about this in a number of ways, establishing and managing archives and copyrights, creating partnerships with values-aligned organizations, and developing programs and projects that address issues of faith, wellness, gender equity, and child protection and support. On paper, the Legacy Foundation is 4 years old. In fact, it's only in March of last year that we secured the services of the final member of our core team, our archivist. Yay. With that key position filled, we are poised for progress. We have been learning and evolving as individuals, as a team, and as a foundation. Individual members of our team have taken on additional responsibilities. We have drawn on our internal human resources to complete tasks that had in the past been outsourced. We have expanded our footprint by working smarter, working with partners, working with the creative skills of a staff that proudly calls itself Team Tutu. We have tackled issues that have local, national, and global impact. Last year, the Board of Directors approved an expenditure to co-host the reenactment of the faith hearings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the Bears Nordé Center at the University of Stellenbosch. The reenactment was staged over 2 days. The value of the gathering was incalculable. It was chaired by the Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, assisted by the commissioners Dr. Yasmin Suka, Professor Hlengiwe Mkize, Glenda Wiltshire, and Pete Mehring. They were the complete panel of commissioners that attended the original faith hearings. And the caliber of the commissioners was echoed by the caliber of the participants. Almost all of the faith communities represented at the original hearings sent high-level delegations to this gathering. Some of those who did not participate in the 1994 sessions sent delegations to this conference. The delegates spoke thoughtfully and from their hearts. They told stories of their denominational journeys since 1994. They came to renew their commitments to the ideal of reconciliation. They also came to take up the responsibility of conscience and care that they had ceded to the government in 1994. In particular, the South African Council of Churches, under the leadership of Acting General Secretary Bishop Malusi Mpumlwana, will re-examine its role in completing the unfinished business of reparation that had been a role envisioned for the Dependence Conference of the SACC. More on the local front, we know that for many working parents, the school year begins long after the work year is underway, and this can create a crisis of care. And so we have created an enrichment program for children over the school holidays. It provides education and employment opportunities for teens and a chance for young adults to take charge. The teens and young adults are trained and supervised by educators from partner organizations and the staff of the Legacy Foundation. With partners at Freya University and the Dutch Postcode, we're supporting local faith communities to enhance treatment adherence in children living with HIV and AIDS. We're also addressing the issue of youth unemployment through our Youth at Work program that equips post-matric young adults ages 18 to 22 with life and job skills to enhance their employment opportunities. And we hadn't accounted for the attrition that we would have over the course of the program, but it has been a happy attrition because a quarter of our cohort have already found full employment. Speaking of youth, we're also thrilled to have partnered with Peace Jam and the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation to host a Peace Jam program at our other partner institution, CPUT, this weekend. And Peace Jam has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, so watch your televisions on Friday. We have had a lot of reasons to celebrate and more causes for celebration still to come. In July, His Archness and Mama celebrated 60 years of marriage with a festival Eucharist at St. George's Cathedral. The foundation also hosted a gala fundraising luncheon, and the funds from that event will be assigned to refurbish support the refurbishment of the old granary building, which is a heritage facility in the city of Cape Town. And under the stellar leadership of our executive mayor, Patricia de Lille, the city plans to lease that building to the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation to be our new home and to be a peace center. And with the support of the now dissolved Desmond Tutu Peace Trust, we're also able to support building that program. Today, we celebrate my dad's 84th birthday, and next week we celebrate my mom's 50th birthday again. When we celebrate their 160 plus birthdays in 2099, it is our goal that a similar gathering to this one will take place with a similarly arresting and vital content to that which we will hear tonight from Advocate Thuli Madonsela. As we mark the 5th anniversary of the annual Peace Lecture tonight, we acknowledge those who have blessed this platform in the past, His Holiness the Dalai Lama by live link up to India, and we all remember that, Mrs. Gracia Michelle, Mr. Kofi Annan, and Mrs. Mary Robinson. What these people and Advocate Madonsela and my parents have in common is that they reflect the virtues of ethical servant leadership. They represent a thread of higher consciousness, of selflessness and courage, a flame that it is our duty to nurture now and forever. The people who wrote South Africa's Constitution and Bill of Rights knew what they were doing. Emerging from 350 years of colonial plunder and racial oppression, they knew not to take our freedom for granted. They understood that, excited as we were under the principled leadership of our extraordinary first president, it may not always be so. Thus, they created checks and balances to protect us from recurrences of the abuses of power that so characterized us in the past. And among the entities created to guard our democracy are what are known as the Chapter 9 institutions, and these include the Office of the Public Protector. The Office of the Public Protector is not a political party, nor was it designed as a sjambok with which to flail the ruling party. It is an institution to protect all of us, including all political parties, from abuses of power, from maladministration, and from corruption. There can be no better candidate to head such an institution than the one with the qualifications and courage to hold all to account without fear or favor. Advocate Thuli Madonsela was appointed to head this particular office by President Jacob Zuma. No comment. On the unanimous recommendation of Parliament, and for that we thank God.
We'll talk about what just happened later, okay? To introduce the Public Protector, it is a pleasure to welcome Don McRobert, who's a seasoned patent and intellectual property lawyer. Yeah, I know you don't trust lawyers, but listen. In addition to authoring From Edison to iPod, he has been involved with numerous initiatives that affirm what we are here about, building our country. He was the founder of outreach programs adopted now by many schools to assist the most needy schools in the township. As an IP lawyer, he has represented all 4 South African Nobel Peace Prize winners, namely the Archbishop Emeritus Tutu, President de Klerk, President Mandela, and the Albert Luthuli family. And he was the founding chairman of the Lawyers for Human Rights movement in Pretoria and was president of the Pretoria Chamber of Commerce. And he successfully sued the government for the violation of the Wild Coast. So, it's a pleasure. Don McRobert, please come forward and introduce the Public Protector.
MC ready. Representatives on the high table, esteemed high table, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight. In fact, she needs very little introduction because she enjoys such a high profile and she commands considerable respect. She has brought to the office of the Public Protector considerable integrity, honesty, and sound legal definition. And starting with the legal side, her training started with a BA in law from the University of Swaziland, followed by LLB degree, University of Witwatersrand. She has honorary degrees conferred on her by the Universities of Stellenbosch and UCT. In 1994, she was offered a seat in Parliament to represent the ANC, but she declined that, saying that she believed that she could do more for the public good if she could avoid political office. And I think she has shown just that. She paid a wonderful tribute to the late President Mandela when she said he gladly, I use that word gladly in her words, he gladly submitted the administration of his affairs to the checks and balances of the law courts and the public democracy institutions. Further along her career, in 1994, she was made a member of the committee which drafted our Constitution. Just part of that, if you read her CV in your books, you will see that she's also been the pioneer or the founder of so much litigation and, in particular, legislation which has inured to our benefit as South Africans, for which we are very grateful. She was offered the post in 2007 to become a member of the South African Law Reform Commission. And then, as you heard, in 2009, October 2009, she was appointed to the office of Public Protector. It's a 7-year period, sadly, very sadly, non-renewable. One wishes it could be renewed. Public Protector Madonsela has, of course, shown considerable courage in the tasks and the missions which she has undertaken. And one thing that I can say as a lawyer is that her reports and her investigations have stood considerable public scrutiny. You cannot find a fault from a legal or a factual point of view of what she has said. She tackles the issue with courage and not the person. She's a very brave lady indeed. And I was so impressed with the article written a short while ago in the Mail and Guardian, where she said that the function of her office is to be able and open to the Gogo Dlaminis, the ordinary folk who believe that they can challenge the actions or the accountability of institutions who hold public resources. When she was appointed, President Zuma made the comment, which Mpo has referred to, that she must act without fear or favor. She has done just that. I give you...
Do it when she's done. Do it when she's done.
Thank you for those very generous words. Program Director, Ms. Ridi Tlabi, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, and dear wife, Mamlia Tutu. His Grace, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, the Tutu family, particularly Reverend Mpo Tutu, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Western Cape, Professor Pretorius, the Mayor of the City of Cape Town, Ms. Patricia De Leo, the many esteemed guests in the room, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the Public Protector South Africa team. I cannot express what an honor it is to stand before you and deliver the 5th Desmond Tutu Annual Peace Lecture. This year's lecture is themed Peace and Democracy. What's law got to do with it? Incidentally, the dialogue is in line with Goal 16 of the recently adopted UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is dedicated to the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, the provision of access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable institutions at all levels. Following on the footsteps of giants such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, former Ireland President Mrs. Mary Robinson, one of the elders, Ms. Graça Machel, is a singular honor. But ladies and gentlemen, the greatest honor for me is the opportunity established by this lecture to be associated with Archbishop Tutu, a quintessential servant leader and global iconic crusader for justice, peace, and human goodness, or Ubuntu. I've admired Bishop Tutu since I was a child. Happy birthday, Arch. May you have blessings, good health, and many more birthdays. I'm grateful to the Desmond and Leah Tutu Foundation, particularly Reverend Mpho Tutu, for this cherished honor. This honor follows just after I was awarded, surprisingly, a Peace and Justice Award by the Anglican Church. And for this, I thank Bishop Makgoba. But I'm just generally grateful to the Anglican community and the faith community in general for the support we are receiving as the office, as the Public Protector South Africa. On my first direct contact with Archbishop Tutu, he unintentionally gave us a practical lesson in servant leadership. And I'm certain he has forgotten that. It was in the 90s in his office where a Swedish colleague, Alan Gustafsson, and I interviewed him about the impact of European funding on human rights during the apartheid years. His warmth and respect for fellow human beings was amazing. But for me, it was a small act of stepping up and serving us tea that left me in awe of him. Incidentally, we did not respect him less for serving us. That simple act of servant leadership left us more in awe of him as a leader. Little did I know then that 2 decades later, I would have the honor of giving a lecture celebrating his legacy as a servant leader and as a crusader for justice, peace, and general human goodness. The central point I want to make today is that law can be a healing and transformative force. Law can be a healing force that fosters peace in a democratic society and the global community by promoting more social justice, human solidarity, and accountability. I also want to indicate that there are certain conditions, though, that must prevail before the law can be a healing and transformative force, and that one of those conditions is the rule of law. I'm deeply encouraged to note the room is full of young and old persons from diverse backgrounds. I suppose it even makes it more gratifying knowing that the people in this room had to forgo an equally important task of supporting our Springboks. This gives me and my team from the Power Protector South Africa hope that we are all joined, like ancient societies, in pursuit of the same cause of optimal conditions for our survival as a people or human race. And we are all collectively pursuing the enjoyment of life by all of us. Like Archbishop Tutu, Mamlia Tutu, and their Legacy Foundation, we are here because of our collective concern for our common fate as a country, as a continent, and as part of the world. Can we reflect for a moment on what would be the outcome if we were not concerned or doing something about our shared fate? James Patrick Kinney's poem titled "The Cold Within" may have an answer for us. The poem, written in the 60s, tells us the story of 6 humans trapped by happenstance on a bitterly cold, dark night. According to James Patrick Kinney, these 6 humans were sitting around a dying fire, and each one of them had in their possession a log that could revive the dying fire. The first person looked across and noted a person from a different racial group. He decided he was not going to use his log because he didn't want somebody from outside his race to benefit from his log. The second person looked across and saw somebody who was not from her church. It wasn't even a different religion. As we saw today, we had a Jewish rabbi speaking to us. It was a different church. She decided to keep her log because she did not want somebody from a different church to benefit from her log. A poor person sitting on one side of the fire saw a rich person across. He decided he wasn't going to use his log because he did not want to benefit the filthy rich. The rich person, not knowing what was on the mind of the poor person, saw the poor person across, and he decided he wasn't going to benefit the lazy poor from his log. A historically disadvantaged person noted members of a historically advantaged group and decided it was time for revenge, and he withheld his log. The sixth person, a mercenary who had never done anything except for gain, decided to withhold his log on account of the fact that his companions were not in a position to pay him for his log. The poem ends as you probably have predicted. Kenny tells us they did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. When James Patrick Kinney wrote the poem about half a century ago, he sought to discourage apathy in the face of injustice and wrongdoing. He was alerting us to what primitive societies seem to have known all along, that ensuring human solidarity and social justice is not an act of charity, but an act of sustainable self-preservation. That seemingly is something that the UN is increasingly aware of. Most societies have a proverb to the effect that it is impossible to light your companion's path without brightening your own. There's another saying that is common in all societies that says that as long as there is injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. In this country, we call this Ubuntu. I am because you are. Ubuntu is a value that the Constitutional Court in S versus Makwanyane said is one of the values underpinning our constitutional democracy. The court also said that the value of Ubuntu is embodied in the constitutional value of human dignity. Now, we know that James Patrick Kinney's selfish and parochial humans died because they failed to appreciate the interconnectedness of humanity. They failed to appreciate that to save themselves for self-preservation, they had to prevent the suffering of others. They had to share what they had with others and perhaps extend social justice to their companions. But what does self-preservation or James Patrick Kinney's poem have to do with our conversation on law, peace, and democracy today? Firstly, I believe that there's a link, and that the conversation on law's relevance to peace and democracy is a timely conversation as we navigate a deeply troubled world, desperately searching for peace and inclusive development. You will agree with me that other than the 2 world wars at the beginning of the 20th century, the world has never been in so much turmoil. As humanity, we've never found ourselves in such a desperate search for peace, regardless of where we are, whether we're dealing with violent crime or civil wars domestically, global terrorism, and ongoing conflict between some states. Peace is something the world is desperately searching for right now. As we reflect more than half a century since James Patrick Kinney's poem was penned, can we say that we're doing better with regard to sharing our collective habitat, planet Earth? Are we not perhaps where we are because somehow, as we progressed, we began to behave like some or all of James Patrick Kinney's people? If indeed we did lose our way regarding social justice and human solidarity, can the way forward lie in our conversation on law's relevance to peace and democracy? My answer is yes to both questions. My proposition is that peace is elusive today in our common habitat as humanity because we have failed on the values of social justice and human solidarity. I believe that social injustice compounded by impunity or lack of accountability is a key threat to peace and stability within nations and between nations. I also respectfully believe that as a country too, we are not where we should be in regard to the values of social justice and human solidarity. Despite our collective commitment to these values, as reflected in the Constitution we have adopted as our lodestar and roadmap to the South Africa we want to become, it is also my belief that because of these failures, sustainable peace is out of our grasp at the moment. How do law and democracy fit in? I'm certain you'll agree with my assertion that the South Africa we have today, with its globally admired, groundbreaking constitution, is founded on faith in the transformative power of the law. Our constitutional democracy is also anchored in the belief in the importance of the rule of law and democracy with regard to ensuring sustainable peace. You're probably already thinking quietly, though, but law is not everything. With society being a system, there are no single causal factors and/or silver bullets for any social problem or issue. You are right. Law is not everything. It doesn't cause everything and it doesn't solve everything. But it is a great part of the solution. But you're probably also thinking that law does not necessarily foster peace. That too is true, particularly if you believe, as the African Union does, that as the African Union believes in its roadmap on silencing the guns in Africa by 2020, that peace is more than the absence of war. And I agree with you, Professor. As a country emerging from years of legalized oppression and discrimination under apartheid and colonialism, we're all aware that law can be an instrument of oppression. Apartheid was essentially about using the law to institutionalize inequality and oppression. The end result was a certain level of order, but no peace. Incidentally, the apartheid government didn't try to have peace. It was about law and order anyway. State institutions such as the police and the courts were part of the machinery keeping alive structural inequality as they enforced laws such as the Group Areas Act, Immorality Act, and Black Administration Act, among others. Through an endeavor to legitimize the state, some of these institutions played some role, though, in ensuring a limited amount of justice or a semblance of justice. What then does it take for the law to facilitate peace and democracy? I believe the architects of our constitutional democracy had the foresight of what it takes for law to foster democracy and peace. They also appear to have been aware of the symbiotic relationship between law and democracy. I will return to this point shortly when I briefly touch on Chapter 9 of the Constitution, which creates innovative administrative and accountability institutions to support and strengthen constitutional democracy. It is my considered view that the single most important factor that makes law an important contributor to peace and democracy is the rule of law. In this regard, it's important to note that the existence of laws that are enforced, no matter how rigorously per se, does not mean there's a rule of law. The apartheid state and some of the oppressive regimes in the world today are exemplary in this regard. It's often said that under apartheid, there was rule by law as opposed to the rule of law. What is the difference between rule by law and the rule of law? The key difference is that in a rule of law state, law and justice are on the same side. The rule of law generally refers to a state of affairs where people are governed by rules rather than arbitrary decisions of those exercising state or public power, and where the rules are general and certain, known by all affected and uniformly or equally applied to all. According to the World Justice Project, the following 4 universal principles are needed for the rule of law to be in place. 1, government and its officials and agents, as well as individuals and private entities, are accountable under the law. That's uniform accountability for everyone, not some. 2, the laws are clear, publicized, stable, and just. They are applied evenly and protect fundamental rights, including the security of persons and property. 3, the process by which the laws are enacted, administered, and enforced is accessible, fair, and efficient. 4, justice is delivered timely by competent, ethical, and independent representatives and neutrals who are of sufficient number, have adequate resources, and reflect the makeup of the communities they serve. You will note that aspects of democratic governance are built into the rule of law principles. For example, people need to participate meaningfully in the making of laws, and those that deliver justice have to be competent, ethical, and deliver services expeditiously. Why is the rule of law important for peaceful coexistence? It's simply because we become part of a collective, so that our fate is better than when we are alone. Would you agree with me? The only reason you'll be part of a community is to improve your fortunes, not to decrease your fortunes. If the collective is governed unjustly and we are treated unfairly or excluded from collective resources or benefits, we cannot be happy or peaceful. thank you for your understanding. Firstly, I would like to apologize on behalf of the Public Protector South Africa that the drama that started a few weeks ago in relation to our work has been brought here. I just want to indicate that the young people are following up on an investigation. They're not the complainants. They've only written to me about 3 weeks ago asking me why this investigation is being delayed. The complainant is Advocate Paul Hoffman, who's here from Cape Town, and we've kept him abreast of developments in the investigation. It is a very complex investigation and has involved a whole lot of people. So I do apologize that they've decided to bring the drama here. We do deal with complainants and we give them feedback. But even though they're not complainants, when they wrote to me, I did write to them to indicate where the holdup is. And I did indicate to them that when we submit the report to Advocate Paul Hoffman and others, they will also be made aware of our findings. Now back to the issue of peace and democracy. I must say, though, in a twisted way, what happened today is a reflection of what happens when some of the elements of the rule of law are missing. The last part about the rule of law that I read is justice is delivered timely by competent, ethical, and independent representative and neutrals who are sufficient in number. So one of the issues that we've raised is the need for adequate resources. Now, Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said the following, I quote, "The rule of law matters to all of us, to the entire human family. Strengthening the rule of law is an essential ingredient to enhance justice, peace, and economic and social progress. The absence of the rule of law underpins functional societies and drives development." And that's something similar to what Professor Pretorius said earlier. It is for this reason that I believe that social justice, human solidarity, and accountability have to be promoted by the law if it is to meaningfully foster peace. I believe this is part of the vision and architecture of our constitutional democracy. In the case called City Council of Pretoria versus Walker, decided in 1998, the Constitutional Court said that the Constitution is a bridge from our past. In that discussion about a bridge from our past, the Constitutional Court mentioned the achievement of equality as part of the constitutional deal. Part of the impact expected from the Constitution as the basic law from which all laws are to be rooted or benchmarked is transformation of society to achieve equality in other aspects of social justice. According to then Chief Justice Pius Langa, during his Harvard address on the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Charter in 2005, that expected transformation of society incorporates the elimination of poverty. I fully agree. The constitutional preamble clearly promotes human solidarity and social justice. It promises to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of every person. But we also know that laws on their own do not change lives. They need to be honestly and consistently applied so that they can make the difference they were made to make. In this regard, it is important that the majority of citizens and residents ethically comply with the laws, and that when that fails, those affected by the failure know their rights and have access to credible institutions to address alleged injustices or wrongs. In this regard, the World Justice Project's rule of law principles are instructive. Also important is the implementation of laws. Good laws sitting in shelves do not change human lives. An example in this regard is Chapter 5 of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. 15 years after this law was passed, it is still not implemented. It's still waiting for a presidential proclamation to put it into law. This is the opposite of a constitutional commitment to the achievement of equality as a value. You will recall that Section 9(2) of the Constitution anticipates legislative measures to redress the imbalances of apartheid, patriarchy, colonialism, and other historical injustices. Again, failure to implement a law cannot be said to be consistent with the rule of law. In this regard, who is to say that our rising inequalities cannot be duly attributed to this inexplicable lapse? What happens when compliance with the law, including the Constitution, fails? Firstly, it is important to note that in contemporary democracies, the Constitution, as part of the law, is a powerful instrument to foster democracy. Contemporary democracies, like South Africa, are constitutional, are democracies where the Constitution is supreme, and the final word on what the Constitution says is belonging to the courts. Here I must indicate, though, that in modern democracies such as ours, the Constitution can only yield transformative outcomes if we use it with the understanding that it's a transformational instrument. If we blindly borrow jurisprudence from old democracies, our Constitution will not yield the transformational results that it was meant to yield. In this regard, we must applaud our Constitutional Court because it has excelled in interpreting this Constitution as a unique constitution. It has done groundbreaking work, particularly with regard to the justiciability of socio-economic rights. What about the facts that the courts are not always accessible, and that courts engage in a dialogue that is pretty much exclusive? It is pretty much the domain of lawyers. Again, modern democracies have provided other structures to supplement the courts. For example, we have what we refer to as ADR, which is alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, or appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms, such as arbitration, CCMA, etc. Even the small claims court is critical as an avenue for civil disputes involving small amounts of money. So all of that is built to ensure that we have good laws and those good laws are known by people, and there are avenues available for people to vindicate their rights. But what about access to justice and accountability when the wrongdoer is the state? The question of access to justice and accountability for state wrongs is particularly complex in the complex modern state where the state is a large, powerful entity, and within the state, oppressive and indifferent bureaucracies often emerge. In that case, the traditional checks and balances help, but they do not solve all of the problems. We know that about 206 years ago already, Sweden noticed that the original checks and balances, what we refer to as the trias politica, was not enough to check excesses in the exercise of state power. An ombudsman office was introduced in this regard. Many democracies have introduced these administrative bodies, not just ombudsman bodies, administrative oversight bodies. Some of them would be called anti-corruption commissions, some would be called investigators general, ethics watchdogs, integrity watchdogs, supreme audit bodies, and human rights commissions. And of course, then we have the ombudsman bodies or bodies dealing with maladministration. These are crucial institutions, but it's important that we note that these administrative oversight bodies, which are new in public accountability, can only make a difference where there is the rule of law. They can also make a difference when their powers are understood and accepted, and where complementary integrity institutions, including the courts, the media, and civil society watchdogs, are functional. The rule of law aspect in the value of administrative accountability bodies is important, particularly when it comes to the issue of horizontal accountability. These institutions are new. We know the courts, we know Parliament, and we know the executive powers. We have brought in new children when it comes to curbing excesses in the exercise of public power. For them to function properly, space must be provided for them to function. In this regard, I wish to draw your attention to the powers of my office, the Pub Protector South Africa. In the case of the Pub Protector versus the Mail and Guardian, decided by the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2012, the Supreme Court of Appeal said the following about the office, I quote, "The office of the Pub Protector is an important institution. It provides what will often be the last defense against bureaucratic oppression and against corruption and malfeasance in public office that is capable of insidiously destroying the nation. If the institution falters or finds itself undermined, the nation loses an indispensable constitutional guarantee," close quotes. This is in line with the understanding of former President Nelson Mandela, who said the following: "Even the most benevolent of governments are made up of people with all the propensities for human failings." The rule of law, as we understand it, consists in the set of conventions and arrangements that ensure that it is not left to the whims of individual rulers to decide what is good for the populace. The administrative conduct of government and authorities are subject to scrutiny by independent organs. This is an essential element of good governance that we have sought to have built into our new constitutional order. An essential part of that constitutional architecture is those state institutions supporting constitutional democracy. Among those are the Pub Protector, the Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General, the Independent Electoral Commission, the Commission on Gender Equality, the Constitutional Court, and others. He then says it was never reason for irritation, but rather a source of comfort for him when these bodies were asked to adjudicate on the conduct on his conduct and that of his government, and that he willingly complied. What really then is the nature of the public protector? I've indicated that for peace, for law to play its role in fostering peace and democracy, firstly, we must have good laws. Secondly, we must have transformative laws, if already there are structural inequalities in society. Thirdly, there must be willingness by the people to comply with the laws, and those who implement them, there must be willingness to implement those laws. But fourthly, there have to be institutions that enforce the laws. Principally, these would be the courts and the other state institutions such as Parliament, and the executive would have to play their role in making sure that things are done in accordance with the law. I've also then mentioned that there are administrative institutions that modern states have introduced to supplement the traditional order, to make sure that there are avenues to hold the state accountable and to hold ordinary people accountable. Different institutions have been introduced. And within the state, in South Africa, we have Chapter 9, which creates a number of institutions. These institutions are independent, and Chapter 9, Section 181 in Chapter 9 says that these institutions are independent and they support and strengthen constitutional democracy. It then mentions them as the Public Protector, Human Rights Commission, and all of the others that President Nelson Mandela mentioned. Section 182.1 is important because it specifically states that these institutions are subject only to the Constitution and the law. My understanding then is that their decisions cannot be second-guessed by anyone, including the executive and the legislature, and that only a court of law may review their decisions. I'm certain some of you may be having an internal conversation there that we've heard the story and we're not happy with it. I don't want to go there. All I can say to you and to anyone who wants to be faithful to the Constitution is that if you want to understand the powers of the Public Protector, the Auditor General, or any of those Chapter 9 institutions, the starting point to understand their powers is Section 181, which establishes them together as a group. What then it means is that if you're saying, for example, if the IEC were to decide that an election that took place in Khayelitsha was not free and fair, and whoever was elected is not going to take office tomorrow, and the elections should proceed. If you accept that, you would then not go and take office the following day. Then you should accept that you wouldn't proceed doing something wrong or not correcting something wrong if the Public Protector has spoken, because they're set up by the same chapter. I hope that makes sense to you. I hope it makes sense, because you wouldn't then say you will go to office until a court of law tells you to leave office, then because the Public Protector is not a court of law. I don't want to go there again. I just want to say that we just have to stick with the Constitution, the understanding being that part of the rule of law is that the laws are certain, they are applied faithfully, and they are not implemented arbitrarily. So each person has to know that if the law says this, or if the law gives me this benefit, then that benefit belongs to me. Just to note also that other organs of state are enjoined to support these institutions. Once you have understood the powers of these institutions under Section 181, you then have to go to their specific powers for each institution. In the written paper, which we will edit very quickly and submit it to you, we have written fully the powers of the Public Protector. But the important thing is to note that each one of these institutions is given specific powers, And then it is also said that the law will give it additional powers. The public protector is given 3 powers: the power to investigate, the power to report, and the power to take appropriate remedial action in respect of any conduct that is suspected or alleged to be improper within state affairs or the public administration. The other thing that I thought was important to mention for tonight is that the public protector got the 3rd power for the very first time in 1996. Before 1996, the public protector had only 2 powers. And those 2 powers are similar to the Auditor General and offices across the globe that are called ombudsman offices. The traditional ones, not the new ones. So it's the power to investigate and to report. So the Auditor General has the power to investigate and report to Parliament. For example, the UK Ombudsman, in terms of Section 10 of the 1967 UK Ombudsman Act, has the power to investigate and report to Parliament. Until 1993, the public protector had the power to investigate and report to Parliament and to report to the President, until 1993. On 1993, when the interim constitution was passed, the public protector got the power to investigate and report, not necessarily to Parliament, to report to the broader public, and if it deems fit, if he or she deems fit, to also report to Parliament, in 1993. So it was still 2 powers. 1996, a 3rd power was introduced, which is the power to take appropriate remedial action. This office has also then been given additional powers as envisaged under the Constitution. It investigates and reports on violations of the members of the executive under the Executive Members Ethics Act. It is one of the institutions that have the power to investigate alleged acts of corruption under the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. It has the power to protect and receive information from whistleblowers under the Protected Disclosures Act. An interesting power that people haven't heard about as we litigate in court is that in terms of the Housing Consumers Protection Measures Act, it has specific review powers, like it says under the Act, appeal and review. So if you're not happy with the decision of the National Home Builders Registration Council, the law of this land says you may apply to the public protector to review the decisions of the National Home Builder. It is an alternative forum under the Equality Act, and it is an office that can assist you in relation to the promotion of access to information air. I just want to drive to a conclusion. Why have I taken you to these institutions? It was partly to just talk about the institutions available to enforce rights. Because if laws have to promote peace, they have to be implemented. When implementation and compliance fails, there has to be an avenue for whoever is wronged to vindicate that right. And then the architects of our constitutional democracy have created these avenues. And it's not just in South Africa only. The entire world has looked at, if you want a society where the majority of citizens and residents are generally comfortable with the way things are governed, there have to be avenues for them to take their grievances or complaints. And these avenues have been expanded. One of the needs, therefore, in regard to embracing these new institutions is a paradigm shift, though. We come from parliamentary supremacy, where parliament was supreme, and there are still many democracies, the old democracies, where parliament is supreme. New constitutions such as ours create an environment where the constitution is supreme. In this particular case, then, there are various avenues that you can go to, but ultimately, the determinant of who's right and wrong is the Constitution as finally interpreted by the courts. For us, why are we important in the equation for peace? Is that the courts are an important enforcer of the law and pillar of democracy. But there are limitations in certain respects. For example, when there's a group of people that need recourse, they need to assert a specific right and they need to follow certain procedures. This is not always possible when people are complaining about service failure. Secondly, if you're just one single person, a Gogo Dlamini, who has been wronged, the courts are often very onerous. You need a lawyer. But one of the limitations also of using lawyers is that the dialogue then is exclusive, as I indicated. Somehow it limits agency by a Gogo Dlamini who goes to court. Whereas these administrative bodies, you speak with your own mouth, you understand. So the ability to understand and to be understood is enhanced in these institutions. So they're part of peace building in our constitution. Naturally, they then become part of the levers of democracy because democracy is a dialogue between those who are entrusted with public power and those who have entrusted public power. Going forward, we need to have that paradigm shift where we accept horizontal accountability. In this regard, I recall President Kruger saying that scrutiny by the judiciary, what is called judicial review, was a principle of the devil. There are parallels between then because he wasn't used to judicial scrutiny. We are now in an era where judicial scrutiny is accepted, but the new kid on the block, so to speak, is administrative scrutiny. We need a situation where decision makers fully submit to constitutional supremacy, including scrutiny by whatever structure is given power by the Constitution. You need decision makers to accept scrutiny by any structure regardless of hierarchy. Ultimately, what we need is to accept what we say is horizontal accountability, where the person or structure you're accountable to is not senior to you. I always use an example of a traffic officer, that the rule of law says when the traffic officer says stop, you don't ask how senior are you, you do just that. Lastly, we also need lawyers that are original thinkers. Our Constitution was created by out-of-the-box thinkers responding to our unique environment. If we're going to take solutions from other democracies as they are and try to transplant them, it is not going to work. The transformative power of our Constitution, the transformative value of our laws will be lost. The goals we seek in pursuit of accelerated inclusive development in the next 21 years of democracy will be a pipe dream if we don't fully embrace the provisions of our Constitution and the provisions of our law. But if we do embrace the provisions of our Constitution and our transformative law, we're not only going to do better in the next 21 years on the question of social justice, we will also accelerate our performance against the pursuit of Agenda 2063, which has been adopted by the African Union. We will also accelerate our performance against the Sustainable Development Goals that we've just adopted. If we do not achieve these goals, though, including the goal of social justice, human solidarity and accountability, peace will continue to elude us. In fact, if these are not achieved in all nation states and between nation states, peace will remain a distant goal for another half a century. That means we would not have learned from the lesson that James Patrick Kinney tried to give us about half a century ago. But I'm certain that people in this room, people elsewhere in this country and elsewhere in the world are committed to peace. They are committed to finding solutions. The reason you are in this room is because you are committed to peace. You are committed to ensuring that there is proper constitutional democracy and that there is the rule of law. I'm certain that you also understand that an unaddressed legacy of inequality perpetuates and exacerbates inequality. People wonder why we've become a much more unequal society. If you start with more resources than I have, and there isn't a very clear path to reduce the inequalities, in fact, our inequalities are going to grow rather than stay stable. It's a natural mathematical situation. Where do we start then? Respect and promote the rule of law. And it's not the job of lawyers, lawmakers, and those in government. The rule of law belongs to all of us, as Archbishop Desmond Tutu once told us. This includes faithful implementation of the law, faithful compliance with the Constitution, not just compliance with the letter, but also compliance with the spirit of the Constitution. We also must respect all accountability institutions, both domestic and international. We must also respect international laws, particularly those we have voluntarily accepted, and customary international law. Ultimately, that will not only ensure that we foster the rule of law and improve the possibility of lasting peace, it would be a way we honor the legacy of Archbishop Tutu and others that have crusaded for justice, democracy, and peace. Thank you.
Halala about Desmond Tutu, halala! Happy birthday, Galogu Desmond Tutu, happy birthday! Yalanta Galogu in the city, Utatile Galogena, Thuli Madonsela, Utatile Umkutala Lawelambanishile, Itatili Gosazana, Utatile Galogena, Geo advocate, Etangan Gangala, Yangam Shakanyawate, Ubau Desmond Tutu. Yalanta Galogum Nandi City, halala Desmond Tutu, halala. What are you saying? Galoguma Tota Masingalibali, Ubau Tutu Galogulika, Wela Kaula Makinga Bakati, Ingwai, Yangon William Gunzetil is Thuli Madonsela, the father of the TRC, the Nobel Peace recipient. But he is the father of the Rainbow Nation, the father of unity, and the father of peace. Yala the city, halala Tutu, halala. Akonamsa Jakalogo. Siya kwaita si golota ganga kulako ya lelonga makawe. Jengoko kaloku mnandi sitho ndisithi yena ulikawa likaula makinga bakhathi yalonto ndisithi thatha indawo yakho kaloku Chesi kaJalamba kuba kaloku namhlanje sifuna ukubona onwabile. We want to see you dancing and rejoicing, enjoying your birthday as you always do. Yalonto ndisithi xa kunjalo ndeham ya
A big thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Public Protector for so many lessons learned in that lecture. Now, I'm a journalist. I know what's going to happen tomorrow. There may be a headline that says, Desmond Tutu lecture brought to a standstill. Chaos at the Tutu lecture. And such a headline will miss the fact that 20 people left this room and about 2,000 more stayed behind. So I guess I'm talking about perspective. What is the measure of success? And this is it. I'm actually quite sad for the people who left this room or had to leave this room, because they remind me of a certain chief whip who called a press conference to react to a public protector's report. And when asked, did you read the report? He said no. But he called a press conference to react to it. I'm not saying any names. All I can say is that it's a pity, because they would have seen on the program that there is a Q&A session. And there are questions could have been asked. And I have no doubt the Public Protector is big enough to handle them as she did. But I am just going to take a moment to reflect on something important, and I think it does link to what you were saying earlier, Public Protector. I was once a student myself. I still am, although I don't interact with my university on a day-to-day basis like some of the students who are here. And I remember one student leader spending the entire year or semester telling us that we cannot write. We can't write until something is achieved. I can't even remember what the cause was. And so we're called to this meeting where a decision was to be made that we are not going to write our exams. And knowing the sacrifices that my mother was making for me to get through university, I was very, very nervous. So I left that meeting to go and check with the humanities department to see where that student was in terms of his academic performance. It turned out that he didn't even qualify to write. I think they call it exclusion. And it wasn't for financial reasons. It was because he spent too much time in meetings telling us not to write. So I didn't think that he was in a position to make a decision for us to write or not write. And only those who qualified to write must make that decision. So I guess I am addressing myself to the students of this university.
Live pictures there from the 5th annual Desmond Tutu Peace Lecture. Advocate Thuli Madonsela delivered the lecture where she spoke about constitutional democracy and the rule of law. That lecture was interrupted for a brief session by Black Land First. And as Reedy was saying, people were escorted out, more than 2,000 people staying for that lecture. And that main address by Advocate Thuli Madonsela honoring the legacy of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He turned 84 years old today. This was his first public appearance since he's been in hospital. And he did look rather restrained, but lots of positive things coming out of that lecture. Madonsela saying peace is elusive because we have failed in values of social justice and human solidarity, and rallying South Africans to come together and uphold the rule of law. That's it from SABC News Prime Time. We'll be back with more after the break.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Spumela Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Hello and welcome to Your World on SABC News Channel 404. I'm Tabile Ngwato.
And I'm Lulu Gabu. Thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at stories making headlines at this hour.
Syrian troops backed by Russian jets mount first major coordinated assault on Syrian insurgents.
Thousands of COSATU members march across the country calling on government to attend to their complaints.
And in sports, the Springboks storm into the quarterfinals of the Rugby World Cup after giving the United States of America a thrashing that involved 10 unanswered tries.
Russian military and Syrian armed forces launched coordinated attacks in western Syria, targeting Islamic factions in the Hama and Idlib provinces. Russian warships also began participating in the operation by launching missiles from the sea today.
The strikes continue amid mounting international criticism of the operation and Russia's souring relations with the West.
Russia's Navy began supporting its air force in the offensive in Syria on Wednesday, launching rocket strikes from 4 warships in the Caspian Sea, over 1,500 kilometers away. The warships launched 26 cruise missiles, destroying 11 targets, according to the Defense Ministry. Earlier, Moscow strongly rebuffed U.S. criticism of its airstrikes, saying that fighting Islamic militants is a matter of national security and that it expects nothing else but understanding from its Western partners.
We've been through this. We know what it's like, and we don't want to see international terrorism in our country again. This is too painful for us, and we expect understanding on this one.
Russian officials said earlier that some 2,000 Russians have already joined ISIS in recent months, and that this number was growing. However, several Syrian groups and U.S. officials have accused the Russian military of targeting not only terrorists in Syria, but also opposition to President Bashar al-Assad and civilians.
A week after Russia's military operation in Syria, it seems that there are quite slim chances for 2 coalitions just to join their efforts in fighting ISIS. What we witnessed today, and this is a very unfortunate development, is a sort of a competition or even rivalry between the 2 coalitions, which are just trying to identify themselves as the only genuine force fighting ISIS without any second hidden agenda.
Syria's neighbor to the north, Turkey, said on Wednesday that it wasn't convinced that Moscow's goal was to go after ISIS. The country's Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said that only 3.5% of Russian airstrikes have so far targeted ISIS. Moscow denies the claims as information warfare. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also expressed alarm on Tuesday over Russia's continuing military buildup in Syria and over Russian planes, which violated Turkey's airspace twice over the weekend, calling it reckless and unacceptable behavior that adds to the tensions in the region. And as both sides continue to exchange accusations, one thing is clear: relations between Russia and the West over Syria are likely to get worse before they can get any better. Anya Ardaiva, SABC, Moscow.
The French and German leaders have urged European Union members to act together to tackle the migrant crisis. This as more than 600,000 people arrive in the bloc this year. French President François Hollande and German Chancellor Angela Merkel have called for a revamped system for dealing with asylum claims.
They spoke during a joint address to the European Parliament in Strasbourg in eastern France. Merkel says that Europe is going through a trial of historic measure.
The migration crisis has created bitter divisions among the 28 states of the European Union. This has seen border controls reimposed across the continent. German authorities are struggling to cope with the roughly 10,000 refugees arriving every day. Many are fleeing conflict in the Middle East.
Dass die humanitären Mindeststandards eingehalten werden, die wir für die
And this is exactly for that reason that humanitarian minimum standards must be upheld for accommodation of refugees and the processing of asylum applications. We owe that to ourselves and to the refugees. And we are a community of values, we are a community of law. And we must orientate ourselves to those values that we have established and set down in the European treaties.
Merkel, who has been Chancellor for almost 10 years, is seeing a decline in her own popularity over her handling of the crisis. She's under increasing criticism for throwing open Germany's borders to Syrian refugees. Speaking 4 days after Germany celebrated the 25th anniversary of the reunification of East and West, France's socialist president paid tribute to his conservative counterpart from Berlin. François Hollande stressed that Europe should remain a diverse alliance of sovereign states while strengthening common policies. And as for Syria, he says any solution had to be based on an alternative to President Bashar al-Assad.
Encore aujourd'hui, il bombarde.
Today, he still bombs, he kills, he murders. Yes, what is happening in Syria concerns Europe because what is at stake there will determine the balance of power in the region, in the whole of the Middle East. We will have to act constantly to bring all nations who really want a solution.
The French president also called on leaders in Europe and beyond to work towards an agreement when the world gathers at the end of 2015 in Paris for the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Meanwhile, the European Union formally launched Operation Sophia, which gives European naval vessels in international waters of Libya the power to stop, board, seize and destroy people traffickers' boats. Around 3,000.
Staying in Europe, riot police in Brussels today clashed with protesters who were demonstrating against government austerity measures.
Violence erupted as members of Belgium's largest trade unions marched across Brussels against the measures. The protesters are against policies of Prime Minister Charles Michel's centre-right government, which assumed power last year. The city square was filled with patches of green, red and blue as members of various unions stood together in solidarity.
The main aim is to pressure the government to change its policies on taxation, unemployment and public services. Government promised to raise the retirement age and to slash costs by about 8 billion euros to balance the national budget by 2018. It also plans to cut the country's debt. A national rail strike is planned for Friday.
The United Nations has amended and renamed its standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Nelson Mandela Rules. These upgraded benchmarks constitute the universally acknowledged minimum standards for the management of prison facilities and serve as a guide for the development of prison legislation and policies globally. Since the rules were adopted in 1955, this is the second time in 60 years that the standards have been amended, the first being in 1957.
The UN continues to honor the legacy of former President Nelson Mandela as the human rights and dignity of prisoners is placed under a global spotlight.
A decision to name the revised standard minimum rules after President Nelson Mandela at a time when the United Nations is celebrating the 70th anniversary is indeed a fitting tribute to a global icon and human rights champion.
Around 35% of the existing rules have been revised to better protect the inherent dignity and value of prisoners as human beings. It strengthens rules for the imprisonment of vulnerable groups, including those with disabilities, calls for medical and health services without discrimination, and access to legal representation, among others.
I think it's very valuable to repeat the quotation from Mandela himself we just heard. That no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails, and that the nation should be judged of how it treats not its highest citizens, but its lowest.
The Nelson Mandela Foundation provided its blessing for the name change. They've called the revised Mandela rules a blueprint for prison management in the 21st century. The approved changes are still in committee, but will require adoption by a full sitting of the General Assembly, likely to happen in December. as Madiba's legacy not only as president or humanitarian, but also as a prisoner who often fought to improve conditions while incarcerated, shines as a beacon of justice even for those behind bars today. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.
Exiled former Prime Minister of Lesotho, Tom Thabane, says the army in that country thinks it has a say in the governance of the country and blames it for the government's collapse. Thabane testified in camera at the SADC Commission sitting in Tabanchu in the Free State. His testimony concludes the Commission's work in South Africa.
A moment Thabane's supporters have been waiting for, but it was not what they expected. And what was expected to be a no-holds-barred moment became a behind-closed-doors presentation. Thabane testified in camera. He only made brief comments before the commission.
Lesotho in particular is still an example of a country where the military think they have a say in the running of the country. They don't have it. And part of the problem that brought my own government that I led to an early end was the fact that I had to have an argument with the commander of an army.
Thabane also hinted on plans to go back home.
And on behalf of all the people who come from Lesotho, I would like to say we thank you most sincerely for the job you've done for us. We will go back home, and I promise you we will try and behave ourselves.